I love that you asked about curiosity. And somehow I don't know where I made this connection, but to me, curiosity is the antidote to the contempt that we see in society.
Woo, welcome. You have now entered Mad Warfare, mutually assured distraction, where we explore the weird, terrifying, and sometimes hilarious ways war is fought today, and how we can all protect our minds before we go too mad to find them.
Oh my!
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
How can you talk if you haven't got a brain?
Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern. Dangerous pattern.
What do foreign intelligence services and your social media feed have in common? If you said they both want to control what I think, congratulations, you're paying more attention than most of Congress. Today we're talking about cognitive freedom, what it is, who's stealing it, and what a career in espionage teaches you about how manipulation actually works. Welcome back to Mad Warfare. I'm Jocelyn Brady.
And I'm Sean Anthony Guillory.
Our guest spent her career at the CIA before turning her attention to how deepfakes, algorithmic amplification, and information warfare, oh my, are shaping reality itself. Please welcome Jennifer Ewbank.
It is great to be here with you. That last line, I'm thinking lions and tigers and bears. Oh my.
Oh my.
It is.
I'm looking forward to digging in with both of you. I love your podcast. I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, flattery. So you spent your career in the CIA, which most people, associate with spy movies and dead drops and espionage. What does that world actually teach you about how manipulation works, and how much of that playbook are you now seeing on everyday people?
I'm not going to do the whole, I was born in a small town, like any of that. But really, I did spend decades in the world of human espionage. And for context for your listeners, so I spent decades doing that. And then the last 4.5 years of my career, I led digital tech at the CIA. So it was artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, IT, global secure communications, a bunch of open source intelligence, a bunch of other things kind of added in there, policy and whatnot. And the reason I mention that is that I did come to that tech world with the mindset of someone who had been, as we used to say, at the pointy end of the spear, means somewhere else over there, out in another country, doing God's work and America's mission. And so what that does teach you is a lot about the adversarial landscape. But if you're thinking about how espionage just gets to the heart of how the mind works and how people feel things, it's 100% true. And so in that world, you're thinking about what motivates a person, what can prompt somebody to take an action, what can prompt them, in the world of espionage, to commit espionage. What would get them to do that? What are the inducements? What are the benefits for that person? And so when I did come into that final role at the CIA leading digital tech, it didn't take me too long to start seeing the parallels there. Because what we were seeing, of course, and this would have been 2019 to 2024, early 24 when I finished up that role, this was a really transformational period, not only in digital tech generally. Remember, GPT really hit the mainstream in 2022, right? But leading up to that, I'll just say that we were doing plenty of things in AI. So, but leading up to that space, everything was changing. The digital revolution was changing the intelligence mission. We had this just tsunami of data out there. And then trying to conduct a job like, recruiting spies and collecting secrets in an environment where everything is being sensed. Everywhere you go, everyone you talk to, every message you send, every thing you like, every time your phone passes a cell tower, all these things are sensed somehow. And so all that coming together, we're really grappling with this idea of how do you tap into the mindset, the knowledge of individuals in this environment. And it really does come down to a lot of the same characteristics as the world of espionage. And whether it's an algorithm or a hostile adversary who's riding algorithms that are designed for commercial effect, they're really doing the same thing. So they're calibrating what makes Sean tick, what makes Jocelyn react to things. And there's such power in the volume of data that's collected on us, on how we react online, right? They know, and there are lots of funny things that can come out of this, but they know more about us at times than our friends might. And all of that is really powerful in helping to calibrate what will get Jennifer to take an action that we need her to take. And so on one hand, that's commercial, and that action might simply be stay on my platform as long as possible so I can get your eyes on and get revenue. But what I started to see was the parallel with hostile foreign actors, most predominantly those coming out of the People's Republic of China and Russia, and then some secondary players in Iran and North Korea, of course, a whole range of cyber criminals who want you to do something else, and very much tapping into the same triggers, if you will. So for me, it was a bit of a wake-up call. The classic world of espionage, the digital age of espionage, and frankly, the revolution in digital tech and the commercial sector. If you drew a Venn diagram, there's this little overlap there in the center.
What are some of the tactics? Like, is there something that we can immediately recognize we're being played?
Well, yes, but it does require you to pay attention, right? We live in this digital age. I love technology. I've always been an early adopter. We just have to figure out how to live with it in a way that retains and enhances human agency and helps, enrich human life and doesn't limit it or constrain it. In terms of how we navigate, we have to have a mental model for the things that we are consuming online. And it starts with some awareness and then just a little bit of, kind of mental gymnastics, I guess. But the awareness piece is really important. The simple fact that algorithms are not designed for enlightenment. They are designed for engagement. That's it. They're not designed to teach us about the world, to help us understand the world in any way whatsoever. They're designed to keep your eyes on a platform as long as possible to maximize revenue. And that's okay. I might want to watch golden retriever videos. That's fine. However, when I'm doing that, I need to be aware of the mechanics in the background. I need to be aware that the pull down is absolutely the same thing as pulling down on a slot machine and the dopamine hits of what comes up. That is exactly what's happening with your brain. And the endless scroll, same idea. I have to just be aware that these tools are there to maximize engagement and revenue for a company so that I can use those capabilities smartly. The second piece is I need to, and I would suggest people have to tap into this somehow. It takes a little bit of work. It becomes second nature. So the first, I think, is understanding the mechanics a little bit. You don't have to go deep. I'm not, a data scientist, and I didn't design social media platforms, but I read and I'm thinking about these things. You have to think a little bit about the source. So, is this content, can I corroborate this content that's so, enticing with anything that looks like a primary source? Or is it really, the equivalent of a screenshot from some stranger? And if there's no way to find a primary source, you just need to have a little flag in your mind. Okay, that's a bit of a red flag. I need to think about that or be a little more cautious. Coming out of the world I inhabited for years, for me, it's second nature to also think about, what is the purpose of said content? Is it to inform me or to influence me? That's just second nature. And that's tied to the third thing that I think is really what people can do is just watch for that little rush of emotion. You can notice, sometimes it's very subtle, but if you read a headline or you're scrolling and you stop for a second, just notice that because mostly it's not accidental. It's there to get you to take an action. And now that action might be as simple as, I just want you to stay on the platform longer, okay, because I need to sell you stuff. It might be as simple as that. But then, okay, it might actually be, I need you to spread this information because my goal as hostile cyber actor in, said adversary country is to drive fissures in U.S. society. And so understanding that emotional trigger is the thing to watch for, I think is really critical. Second disclaimer is that none of these things should suggest that we are weak or ignorant or anything like that. It's not at all. It is the systems that have been built around us are designed to manipulate the way our brains work, the way the actual brain chemistry works. This is evolution and biology. This isn't about, hey, I need to be smarter or I just need to try harder. It's none of that. We just have to recognize that, again, as I started with, this is not optimized for our enlightenment or our edification. It is optimized for our engagement and eyes on, and that is it. And the algorithm doesn't care what you look at if it can keep you on the platform. Those hostile adversaries, they do care, and they want to ride all of that brain chemistry, all of the systems design, all of that, and the algorithms that are designed to keep our eyes on the platforms. They want to ride all of that in order to insert their messaging and to divide U.S. society. And there are days when I look across this kind of fragile landscape and I think, they're having an effect.
Yeah, I'm just trying to. And by the way, to answer your earlier question, what powers me is professional wrestling and cinema roles. But besides that,
let me just tell you, I'm sorry to interrupt, Sean, but crazy things happen, right? Because, okay, it's not just what you like. They're calibrating dwell time, right? And it's microseconds. And so it could just be that you had a curious pause, like, oh, what is that? I've never seen that. It could be disgust. It could be outrage. Like, I can't believe that this is on my feed, but that registers only as engagement because you paused it a little bit. And so I found myself for 6 weeks probably at one point trying to climb my way out of Nigerian infidelity Twitter.
You clicked it once, dwelled on it.
It was probably after some trip to Africa, and I found myself like, okay, this is really disturbing. It's not really for me. But man, it's fascinating.
I was expect that. No, that's the kind of sides and rabbit holes that we
all
thrive
find
on
ourselves
here at the
there.
Map Warfare Podcast. Most definitely. So sometimes, as we say at the show, sometimes the call is coming from inside the house. I didn't know if you had, but just any thought in terms of some of the things that are more like domestic that are still using these platforms, or the platforms themselves are, again, they're a part of our American enterprise enabling that kind of action.
It's a good question because coming out of the world that I inhabited for decades, right? I had both the challenge of living and operating abroad, trying to, protect our country, et cetera, find my way of, just chipping away at the bad guys somehow. But I also had the luxury of doing that, not having to have a role in anything domestic in the US because we were banned from doing any of that. And that's the way it's supposed to be and probably should be. Yeah. But I came to the conclusion that the dynamics at play, whether we're talking about domestic fissures in society, whether we're talking about foreign adversaries trying to influence what we think, whether we're talking about trust in institutions, trust in each other, it's all kind of playing in that same dynamic space. And so I could spend, all my intellectual energy trying to parse it apart and say, okay, this is exactly what foreign adversaries want to do. This is exactly what commercial systems want to do. But if I'm just thinking about how do I navigate this landscape, how do I use technology, benefit from it, protect my mind from the kind of the insidious power of kind of algorithmic amplification and kind of pulling you down into that whirlpool of outrage loops, right? If we want to go I'm not the expert on all the academic studies, but I do read them. And there are ones out there that talk about algorithmic amplification and how that actually can lead you down this path of becoming more and more outraged over things because of the way information is shaped and the way your brain works. So all those things happening, I just want to figure out how do I navigate this, take the best of what is offered with technology, protect my mind from these insidious forces that all have different motives. My motive is to understand the world, to live a good life, to find some joy in all of this. And really, this is a bit of a tangent, but I'm in the early stages of research for a book, and my book, I think it'll fill a gap. At least that's my hope, right? Well, we'll find out. There's a lot of academic literature out there about really exciting and interesting research on how the brain works and how digital tech works on the brain and how we, all this stuff about outrage and, doom scrolling and fragmentation of society, and the fact that even, having this nearby is depleting my mental energy. Like, there are all these great studies, but I think what's not there is, and this is what I hope to create, sounds ambitious, but we'll see. I'll do my best, is some kind of a playbook. Like, how do I navigate, how do I protect my cognitive liberty, the phrase I would use. And that may seem a little grandiose, but it really goes back to my own childhood. Okay, now we have confessions. Like, I was always that kid. Like, I just never believed anything unless it could be proven. I wanted to find my own facts. I wanted to make my own decisions. I mean, super irritating if you're a parent, I'm sure. And
no, but you're predisposed for this career.
My parents were saints. Instead of trying to argue with me, it would be like, let's go to the library. And so, but that, I think that's kind of how I came out of the womb. And so that's important to me. Like, I may come to believe what you believe, Jocelyn. I may come to believe that. I want to get there in my own way, and I want to see the facts, and I want to make that choice myself. And so the idea behind the research, and eventually a book, we'll see, is really kind of, how can you navigate that in a practical way? There's lots of great academic stuff out there, lots of great research, but I'm just a person. I'm not, a professor trying to teach a class on this. I'm just trying to navigate the best I can. And I have a slightly different perspective because I've seen what the bad dudes are trying to do to us. And so, like, how do I translate that? And so that's kind of where I'm heading. And what I think is important is not to discount your question, Sean, because it's really important. But I'm also, I'm 100% like a free speech person. And so I don't think the government should ever be in the position of deciding what is truth. And so we need to find other ways to help us get there. So it's is it, more free speech is the best answer to speech you don't like? Maybe so, probably so. This is a topic that comes up a lot in the deepfakes arena, right? Because, and I work with a deepfakes company. It's one of the advisory boards that I serve on, and it comes up a lot, right? Because there are all sorts of legitimate use cases for synthetically generated media. I use AI to create graphics for, social media, for all sorts of things. And so there's a lot of legitimate use there. That said, like, how do you protect against the sort of invasive aspects of deepfakes that are meant to slip past your defenses and make you do something that otherwise you wouldn't? And what are the effects on kind of trust in the country? And so those are things I think about a lot. And on the deep fake one, just as in the speech area, I think it's just a bit of transparency. I think it's really about giving people information to make decisions on their own. And so maybe that's, like the company I work with, an ability to tag or characterize digital media, like at an enterprise level, as it's being streamed or ingested onto a platform that simply says, maybe there's a little thing next to my image here that says, this one is likely AI generated. And then you are the user, and you use that information as you wish. Now, if it's know your customer check with a bank and it says that this is AI generated, then okay, yeah, we know what we're going to do with that.
Do you think that's a role that government could or should play, is like mandating labels, transparency labels? And then a secondary question to that is, what about when it comes, particularly protection of children? Because we see that there are deep fakes that are undressing children. Yeah. Where can the law fit in to that free speech conversation?
Luckily, there has been some movement in recent months on that topic, and, government takes its time, right? But I'm really glad you mentioned that one, Jocelyn, because I go to conferences a lot, and I'll be in various groups where people are talking about the deep fake threat. And I'm almost sorry to say this, but I will, because I think it's uncomfortable truth. 9 times out of 10, they don't mention 90%, 95%, who are the victims. They're women and children, and they are victims of non-consensual intimate imagery that can destroy a life, harm one's psychological health, and they rarely mention that. It goes immediately to, and I get it. We're talking about businesses, but go immediately to the $25 million deepfakes fraud in Hong Kong a year plus ago, which is important, absolutely. But how about all those kids? How about all of those women? And so there has been movement this year, these last few months, which I'm glad to see. It should simply be illegal. That's, I think, the first thing. And from there, then you can figure out how do you enforce that. And enforcement, I think, would naturally lead to some technical capability to identify what is AI generated and what is not. But the reality is, if in Jennifer's ideal world, where we're trying to fight the abuse of children, whether the image is real or fake doesn't matter. It should equally be illegal. It's equally
100%.
harmful. And so we just need to go to a point where that happens. And so if we have AI labeling, okay, good, but that should still be a crime. And it's tough. So I'm kind of bouncing around here a little bit because you're going to think this is a weird connection. Been in many policy conversations in my old life about regulation over companies in the US. Not because CIA has anything to do with it, we don't, but big questions like, how do you protect critical infrastructure in the United States when most of it is privately held? And we know that very aggressive, very capable and ambitious cyber actors around the world have penetrated that critical infrastructure. So what do you do? Many countries around the world, the infrastructure is owned by government. That's a much easier thing to manage. But here, how do you even navigate that? Because every well-intentioned attempt to help on the part of government can look like overreach depending on where you sit. And this will be a shocking thing for me to say, but again, in my category of oversimplification, I mean, the Constitution is basically a series of rules to keep you out of my life. Government. It's tough. Like, where is that line? And so anything that government can do to encourage the right behavior, I think they should. Where things are clearly criminal, absolutely, let's do it. But it's a harder call than one might think, because we all want the same outcome. We all want critical infrastructure to be secure. We all want children to be protected. We all want bad actors to be caught. But when you get into the details at times, it's much more, I don't know, nuanced, and figuring out how to get there is not so easy.
One thing I kind of wanted to go back to, I just want just possible food for thought. Again, like what you're working on right now, like what are these different things that individuals can do to protect themselves, or metaphorically, like, judo flip, different kind of threats and whatnot?
I think first it's awareness, right? It's like any problem or any challenge that we face in life. First, we have to be aware that we are experiencing it. And hopefully people feel that awareness before it gets to an extreme state. We've seen some very extreme examples recently of people who feel that they have been seriously harmed by the way social media works. And again, I'm not anti-social media. There've been a lot of benefits, but awareness of how those tools work on our brain is step one. And in my continuing theme of oversimplification, there are kind of three things I look at. And the first is reclaiming your attention. So all of these things are designed, all of these forces that I've talked about are really designed to fight for your attention in one way or another. And so whatever you can do to reclaim it is going to be beneficial to you. And so I am, even though I do use digital tech and social platforms, like I am the enemy of all notifications. And so they can be off completely, because each time a notification comes, it's just hijacking your attention and throwing you back into a habit loop that's engineered to keep you there. I read this really fascinating report. It goes back years now, many years, really all about where your most original and creative thought comes from and the effects of distractions. And in essence, what the neuroscientist wrote about was that the two systems can't operate simultaneously. And so I might be in a mode of deep thinking and productivity, and anything that pulls me out of that, and it could be the distraction, the so-called mere presence effect of having this nearby, it could be a notification, it could be whatever. The two systems of your brain can't operate simultaneously. And so the simple version of all of that, in my mind, is reclaim your focus and you reclaim your mind, and just create those moments, like protect them.
You've been very nuanced with how you've been talking about the information space. Would you describe or even analogize the information space as a quote unquote battle space, or do you
100%.
think that's an analogy too
No,
far?
it is.
If you thought different, open,
because
interesting.
I just want to be slightly provocative about it. I'm a few weeks out from doing a TEDx talk that I have tentatively titled "Winning the Secret War for Your Mind," and yes, I do.
Okay, so you go that far.
I love that name.
So you take it all
I
the
do
way.
call
I
it a
see.
battlefield, and it is your attention is the battlefield of this war. Whoever's fighting on the other side, and so you have to defend it. So that's my first piece. The second piece. And I think the science is mixed on this one, but I would still say for me, I think it works and I think it's a good thing to do, is sort of challenge your reality. So what I mean by that is that you've seen more and more people get their news from social platforms. Social platforms are algorithmically driven to amplify what you want to see. The effect of that is that it builds this, I call it in my talk, a comfortable cage of confirmation bias. And so you have to break out of that somehow. And so it is, follow a few people who are thoughtful that you don't agree with, challenge your thinking. And I keep coming back to something that Tony Hsieh years ago told me. He's passed since. He was the CEO of Zappos, very creative, innovative leader at the time. And he always talked about collisions. And so for me in digital space, what I've concluded is that the most insightful ideas, the most innovative, like the real insights don't come from living in a digital world where you're in agreement with everything. It comes from the conflict, the collisions of ideas, right? Where you're challenged in your thinking, where, new things might give you a different perspective. And if you are living so comfortably in that cage that I've described, that's fine. But just know that you are trading off insight for convenience. And so I say challenge your reality. I think that's a good thing to do. To be candid, some of the studies I've read, I think, it's a little bit split. Spending time reading what, the other side thinks about something is not necessarily going to change your ideas, but I think it's still a good thing to do to be a good citizen. And then the third piece is thinking, and it goes back to what we said earlier, is finding some way to think critically about the information you consume, verify it in some fashion. So think about the source, think about whether there's an intent behind that information, whatever it is, and just spend that slight micro pause to recognize whether what you're reading is fueling an emotion of some kind, particularly something that's more active, like anger, outrage, or even like this triumphalism. Like it can be a positive, but if it's that more active thing, that's what gets you to take an action before you pause to think about the action. And so reclaim, challenge, verify is, I think, a useful framework.
Now I'm now wondering about the level of distraction. Is my cat a battle space? Like, she interrupts me all the time. Am I ruining my focus by having an animal in the house?
I can tell you my dogs ruin my focus all the time.
You adorable focus ruiners.
Yeah, that's all right.
You've talked about the war on trust, and I'm curious how do we start to notice it? Is it already here? Or, if it's like what's the analogy? If it's like being a fish trying to describe water, you're blind to it, right? But how do we know who to trust? If we find a source and, if it feels very squishy to us, and how do we repair it? Should we repair it?
I have used that phrase, and this is largely in the adversarial space, but I think about foreign actors trying to affect the way we think, trying to drive fissures in society, deepfakes trying to get you, transfer millions of dollars, whatever it might be. I do think it is a war on trust, and I think that I think trust doesn't collapse immediately. I think it erodes. So to your analogy, I think it erodes over time, and you can already see indicators that trust really is not a good place. And I don't mean just here. You see it in lots of countries around the world. Europe has been experiencing this quite intensely. Trust in institutions, trust in government, trust in each other. What you are seeing more and more of today, whether it's around elections or whether it's just around messaging online, the so-called liar's dividend is really becoming a thing, right? And so this is, for those who aren't as familiar, this is the idea that because there are demonstrated instances of X thing being fake, all of a sudden this becomes a reasonable explanation for all sorts of stuff. So if there's content that I'm generally supportive of, I'm not going to look at it very critically. But if it's something else, I'm going to say, well, that's a deep fake. That could be fake. Or
Wasn't me.
a political candidate doing something, generally frowned upon. All of a sudden, the opportunity is there to say, well, anything could be deep fake these days. Anything. And technically it can't, because the quality is so good, you cannot tell the difference. And so it's a very interesting experiment or survey that was done by the company that I work with in that space. They're called Reality Defender.
They're awesome.
They did a survey with thousands of participants to spot deepfakes. Many of those participants were cybersecurity folks, right? So skilled and aware that they were doing a test, and the results were only a little bit better than tossing a coin. And so here were people with knowledge, skilled, critical thinkers, and they knew that they were spotting deep fakes. They were trying to, and it wasn't much better than toss the coin. So my point being that trust starts to erode in that environment. If you don't even know, and if I think about adversaries and what their strategic goals are, they don't need you to believe a particular lie. Not at all. They just need you and want you to doubt everything that's true. And so you don't have to be particularly effective in the actual lie, but if you can just degrade the information space so that people just become a little bit numb to it all, and they're, even without recognizing it, have become resigned to the fact that I just can't even tell anymore, so I'm not even going to try. Because it's just too much mental energy, it's too much of a distraction. That's victory for hostile adversaries who really want to harm this country. I do think this war on trust is something that requires more attention, more conversation. It's a bit esoteric, so it's not going to make the evening news every night, but it is having an effect. And I do think it is partly what is contributing to the loss of confidence in institutions, in kind of our governance model, which is unique in human history and I think very successful, and eroding trust in our neighbors, right?
Because it's hard to quantify and hard to point out, here, don't you see where the water is justing out the dam. So that kind of measurement aspect, I'd love to talk about it, but one thing you're really making, I'm trying to even, it's coming together in my mind again, I'm having the Jimmy Neutron brain blast over here. A lot of the things that you're also suggesting, what individuals can do to kind of protect themselves, and then we have this kind of trust thing, which is kind of person to person, group of people. I'm wondering now if, especially if we're talking about defense and a cognitive kind of defense and protecting our cognitive liberty, if that aspect of not necessarily that the person is like Rambo or the Doom guy and be able to, again, shoot down all these kind of cognitive risks by themselves, but in defense necessarily that you're working in some sort of community. You have your band of brothers and sisters together, community almost being a necessary aspect for defense, because again, you need trust to have it, again, this kind of group to begin with, and taking on these threats together, not necessarily just the individual by themselves, even though there is times where, close combat, but anyway, again, so the analogies are kind of circling on my head, but I guess the question is, do you think in terms of that kind of cognitive defense that this aspect of having some sort of community that's trying to defend with you is almost a necessity?
Good question.
This is all coming. This is brand.
I think, we're always more powerful in a community. And so maybe there is something to that. And what's interesting, what's really interesting though, is a podcast like yours would not have existed years ago. And I just, honestly, and I just met with a brilliant person from the Cognitive Security Institute, which would not have existed. So I think there's this recognition that there is an issue out there that we need to grapple with, and we need to figure out how to manage without, again, to overuse the metaphor, kind of breaking the looms, the digital looms, because that's a losing proposition. We want the advantages of tech on our economy, on information sharing, on competition with adversaries around the world. We want all that, but I do think that there is real value. There's such value, and we overlook it these days, in maintaining those analog touch points. So actual in-person talking to people, particularly if one finds oneself down this rabbit hole of algorithmic amplification and I'm being told the things that I believe over and over and over and over again. I think you need that touch point outside of that cage, as I mentioned earlier. You need to be in the environment where people, love you, respect you, you're friendly and open-minded, but, maybe they think differently. And to remind yourself, we become, inevitably, less curious about the other side of any issue. The certainty is also bad. I'm certain of it because look at all my evidence. Okay, everything I look at my evidence. So I become less curious. And then the dangerous part is that your brain actually interprets disagreement as hostility and threat. And I have seen the impact of that. I mean, there is nowhere in America that's more polarized than Washington, D.C., and I live in the area. I have seen how people who were colleagues, who were friends, who are neighbors, literally can't talk to each other anymore. It's not because they're weak, and it's not because they're ignorant or anything like that. It's because their brains work, like biology works a certain way, and evolution worked a certain way, and our brains work a certain way as a result. And it really takes effort to break that cycle. Luckily, I've never had this problem, but many people have, where you can't even sit at the Thanksgiving table with particular family members anymore because you're on the opposite sides of an issue. Well, throughout history, families have been on the opposite sides of issues, but we managed to love each other in the same room because we didn't interpret disagreement as a threat. And that's what's happening in this environment now. And a lot of that is rooted in the psychology of it, of what we're seeing online and how we engage with information. Maintain those footholds in the physical world, in the analog world. The people, physical media, long form articles and books, find those ways to maintain a foothold outside of the gravitational pull of digital tech and social platforms.
Two things. I've never thought of this before, but I think it would be really cool. What you were saying sparks an idea, which is, what if we had community debates where you had to take the opposite position? I think we had to do that in high school, and it'd be really interesting if you sign up for the thing and then you have to argue against bananas, but you love them.
Exactly. Inevitably, it just helps you understand that there's a rational human being at the other side of that argument. Somebody whose world experience, life experience is different, and they have a different opinion, and bananas just aren't for them, right? But that doesn't mean that, we can't be friends because we all like fruit. It's the old, high school debate class approach. And there is something to be said about that.
And one more question before asking how people can find you if you want to be found.
I'm from the CIA, or used to be, spent a career not found.
How do we keep our curiosity alive?
Oh, that's such a good question. And I really do think that, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit, because one of the benefits of adjusting one's mental model for engaging with digital tech, if you think about, reclaiming your attention and challenging your beliefs and verifying your information, sure, it's going to make you more resilient to manipulation online. Okay, that's a primary benefit. It will do two other things. It rebuilds empathy. And there was a really great study a few years ago at Stanford where engaging in respectful dialogue and listening to one another, the equivalent of having more balanced and diverse information feed, resulted in people not only agreeing on some policy questions that they were gathered to discuss, but recovering empathy that they had lost. So I think resilience to online manipulation, I think about empathy, and I can't prove it, but I do think it rekindles curiosity. If you can start holding competing ideas in your brain again simultaneously, You can connect with people who view the world very differently. And then the next step is you're kind of interested, right? You just want to know, like, oh, how does Jocelyn think about this? And it's without the contempt, right? That is kind of embedded in this whole idea of you're the other side that I don't want to listen to. And so I do think that curiosity is one of the beneficial outcomes of consuming information in our digital landscape differently and thinking differently about it. Just recognizing that my narrow algorithmic view of the world is not the world. It's, I've voluntarily handed over the curation of my reality to some algorithms. And just to know that and to accept that there are people all around the world who see the world very differently. And I'd like to know something about that. I love that you asked about curiosity. And somehow I don't know where I made this connection, but to me, curiosity is the antidote to the contempt that we see in society.
Got it.
Mic drop.
We got to end it on that. It's not going to, that's the peak.
This has all gotten very heavy. I'm actually much funner at a party than this.
Jennifer, how can people find you if you'd like to be found?
Same way you found me, I think, which was LinkedIn. We met each other on LinkedIn. So I do post regularly on issues around these topics and around cybersecurity and AI and leadership in the digital era. My website is Jennifer-Ewbank, spelled EWBANK.com. If you skip the dash, you go to the site for a really lovely and talented Dutch pop singer, but I am not she. And so I have the dash. She got there first. But there you'll find information, recent publications, media appearances, that sort of thing. I try to keep that updated. There's also now a blog on that page that I started recently called Shadow and Signal, and try to dive more deeply into some of these topics. Regular contributor to the Cypher Brief, an online national security platform. They do amazing work, amazing people there. I write less frequently, but also for Homeland Security Today, another platform dedicated to Homeland Security, as the name would suggest, and trying to bring that sort of digital lens to issues around security inside our country. So those are places where you can find me, and please reach out if you're interested in these topics. Connect on LinkedIn. Be happy to hear from you.
Thank you so much for being on the show, all that you've contributed in terms of your insights on the years, all the things that you've done in terms of bridging that kind of government to industry kind of gap and getting folks really thinking about it. Just, again, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Oh, I'm delighted. I was just delighted to get your invitation. So thank you. Maybe next time I'll interview you because you guys have so much.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much.
I've come to talk with you again. Come and be inside my head. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. Cancel me, cancel me. I got things to say, you can cancel me. It's only a matter of time till we all win. Cancel the say. It's only a matter of time till we all win. Cancel the say. It's only a matter of time till we all win. Cancel the say. Cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me. Cancel me. Cancel me. I got things to say. You can cancel me.